Hi, welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norman, your host. Well, we're producing here episode 130, and we think we've got some pretty good information. As the long and open water season winds down, we get a chance to spend some time talking about match racing. Bayview Yacht Club will be sponsoring a part of the World Tour and called the Detroit Cup. They'll be in town August 26th through 28th. And match racing is some of the best head-to-head racing you can ever imagine. We're going to find out about that by talking to the best match racer in the world. Chris Poole talked to us from the Chicago Yacht Club yesterday. Chris was at the Belmont Harbor and spent some time talking to us about the event. They're in Chicago. The World Tour is in Chicago this weekend. They'll be in Detroit next weekend. It's an event you don't want to miss, and we'll talk to him. We're also going to have John Smotherman, who's very involved in the Detroit Cup for Bayview, talked a little bit about the logistics of the race. He's also one of the officials that will be part of the festivities coming up next weekend. We'll certainly be there, but we want to get a chance to talk about what match racing is. It's the perfect made-for-television event, but I think it's gotten a little bit lost in the landscape of sail racing. It was certainly a breeding ground for a lot of America's Cup participants over the last 20 years. It was 1999, the first year, so it's in its 24th year, actually 25th year of operation. So it'll be kind of fun to watch, and I think you'll enjoy the interviews with both Chris and Lance, and we'll certainly be on site next week at Bayview to cover that entire wonderful event. We're also going to take a trip down Europe way. We're going to spend some time talking with Connor Korgard, who was a 2024 Olympic hopeful. And we're going to spend a little time talking about the disappointing Olympics in Paris, and most specifically in Marseille. He's going to give us some insight to what we might be looking for. We talked earlier in the season, the newly appointed U.S. Olympic coach, Marcus Lynch, who now has the task of getting the Americans ready for 2028 in Los Angeles, and specifically Long Beach. Marcus has got a big job ahead of him because this is probably the poorest example or poorest finish of U.S. Olympic team, and there's a variety of reasons, but we'll try to delve into some of those conversations. We also had a chance to spend some time with the GL52 fleet. We didn't get a chance to go all the way up to Harbor Springs and cover the Little Traverse Cup, but we did get some pictures of their charitable aspects of working with kids, both from the Little Traverse sailing area as well as the folks from Traverse City. So that'll be a little bit of a catch up. And then we'll be at Macatawa certainly in September for their finale. And it was interesting. John Hune, who's been on the show a couple times, had a great weekend at the Little Traverse Cup. And I think he leads the fleet into the championships coming up in mid-September. The other thing we wanted to mention is the J35 North Americans are coming up at North Star Yacht Club September 6th through 8th. And then next week, Throwdown in Motown, being a part of the One Design. As you guys know, we've covered the One Design pretty well over the last, couple of months. And they've got Catalina 22s and J35, so they'll be a part of that whole thing. So we'll pay attention to that. So up next is a little bit about the Detroit Cup. And we think you'll enjoy the interview with Chris, so stay tuned.
Day 2 of the Congressional Cup delivered the amazing racing action for which it's come to be known for the past 59 years. 12 of the top match racing teams in the world hope to make it to the next round of qualifying as the racing action continued, but only 4 would make it, and the rest will then head to a second chance repechage round.
I'll be honest with you, it's a privilege for me to be out here at this. Nobody's out there at 62 crewing. I mean, I enjoy every day and I savor it. And to sail against and with these world-class sailors is a privilege for me. Match racing is the coolest part of sailing, in my opinion, because you can do things in match racing that if you did a fleet race, you'd get thrown out of sailing and beat up in the parking lot. But here, you're complimented for it.
All the big players are here, really. Our coach, Jordan, on our boat, he would tell us stories about when he used to race them, and we sort of thought they were all made up, but it's pretty good to get here and, line up against some of these guys.
They're good at what they do, but they still do mistakes. We're going to find our way to get into those moments where they are going to do some mistakes, because it will happen for sure.
Yeah, we racing at Bay Borsche, who we faced in the finals last year. We had a clear plan of what we wanted. We're able to get a penalty on him in the pre-start when he attempted to steal balls and collided with our port side. We're feeling good. We're still ironing out a few things, but we're pretty happy with it. Conditions are a bit more stable now than they were in race 1 for us.
Yeah, no, feeling fast, feeling a bit more switched on now, and yeah, a really fun race.
After today's races, Ian Williams, Jeppe Bork, Dave Hood, and Gavin Brady will move on to the next round, leaving the remaining 8 to fight it out to see who will advance as the Congressional Cup continues here in Long Beach, California.
Welcome back. We're talking to Chris Poole from Belmont, Chicago Yacht Club, and we're talking to the best match racer in the world. Chris is coming to Detroit for the Detroit Cup. You're in Chicago for the World Tour at the moment. And just wanted to take a couple seconds out to talk about you're number 1 in the rankings. You were obviously the world best in the world in 22 and 23. And we look forward to having you to Detroit. But you're in Chicago right now, so that's a big race there.
Yeah, it's the third stop on the U.S. Grand Slam Series, which for the past few years has been part of the World Match Racing Tour with points towards the World Match Race Tour leaderboard. So this is the third event, and then the last event will finish up in Detroit for the first time. I don't think I've done the Grand Slam where it ends in Detroit, so looking forward to that.
Do you have any difference between when you play in Chicago? It's a little bit different. I know when the SailGP guys came into Chicago, they had freshwater versus saltwater, but now you're in Detroit. You're on the Detroit River, so current comes a part of that process. Is it are venues with this tour? Are the venues much like some guys are made for certain golf courses, some guys are made for certain ski hills? Is that also true on your tour?
Yeah, I think when you race around the world, you find certain teams are stronger in certain venues. One thing about match racing is that it's the best team that'll usually comes out on top, not necessarily the hometown favorite. You really have to be able to sail all courses. Like I know there are some sailors that don't like certain boats and don't like certain venues and just won't sail there. I don't see any issues with it because if it's a weakness, then it means I have room to improve in that spot. So I just look at each event and venue as a challenge for the team to get better.
Chris, you grew up in Maine. You spent a lot of time in Opties to grow up. You kind of came through it. What is it you like about match racing?
I like that it's a level playing field between the teams. I like that there's no advantage to equipment. Like, you're not, going into an arms race and like you find in certain one design classes, if you look at some classes, it's really about who has the best equipment, whereas match racing, it's a level playing field. So it really shows who the best sailors are and not who has the best equipment.
Part of that also comes when you guys race. You might change as many as 2 and 3 times in a given day to boats that you're already racing as a fleet, which I find remarkable.
Yeah, so you rotate boats at most events. They try to do a good job of making sure that if there are any discrepancies between the boats, they're quite small in match racing. The boats are pretty one design. And then they do a good job of making sure that you do rotate through the boats so nobody gets a fast boat for, an entire day. So there's no real advantage there. Again, it just comes back to having the best team.
Yeah. The tour has been around since 99. America's Cup is obviously probably the greatest noted sail race. Match racing is America's Cup. Why is it the match racing tour maybe has more, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me it's the best racing in the world, yet it doesn't get the notoriety, or it doesn't seem to have the notoriety that maybe it deserves. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think the World Match Racing Tour was always a feeder. It's the same format of racing that you see in the America's Cup, and I think it used to get a lot of press and exposure in the past, and then with the transitions to catamarans and then to foiling, I think people see it as a difference. I personally disagree with that. I think, you're going to see in this America's Cup, the teams are even closer than they were last time. And, at the end of the day, whether you're doing 4 knots or 40 knots, it's still a match race. You still have to predict what your opponent's going to do. You have to sail the boat better than them. You have to position it better. It's, yeah, the speed changes and it puts more emphasis on, certain things, but it's still one-on-one. You still have to kind of predict and win the pre-start and get out ahead, and that can make life very easy.
There's a comment in one of the videos that basically says the things you get applauded for in match racing would get you kicked out of a yacht club in regular racing. So aggression is part of that vernacular in terms of match racing. What do you think is the greatest single skill for a skipper to be successful in your sport?
Within match racing, it's a couple different things. You want to have boat speed, but you also want to be able to be a good pre-starter. Early in my match race career, I was incredibly strong at the pre-starts and predicting what my opponent might or might not do. But, where I was weak was in the boat speed. I got off the line ahead and strong, I could generally keep the lead, but occasionally I would find myself struggling to get the boat going quickly. And over the last 3 years, we've really built a team that has improved our boat speed, which showed through at our first Congressional Cup win last year, going undefeated. And what, most people don't realize about that year is that we were actually the first boat to 23 of the 24 first top marks, and we never really saw an opponent after that. And that was key to, both a combination of my starts and our boat speed team just getting everything really dialed in. So it's a bit of everything, but generally having a knack for being 30 seconds ahead and kind of an idea of what your opponent's next moves might be, playing chess essentially, is probably one of the really strong advantages to have.
Being in Chicago, you could almost talk about Michael Jordan dominance in that race that you had when you win 24 of those races. That's a pretty amazing record. Last couple questions. For the last 5 years, I didn't think anybody wouldn't argue that racing's gotten better, especially international racing. Has the match fleet that you're racing in now, the World Tour, has it gotten better as well in terms of the sailors and the guys coming into it?
Yeah, the big events are still good, and you've seen a really big rise in the younger, 18 to 25-year-old group that's come in. I kind of slot in between. There definitely was a dip during COVID when you couldn't get international. A lot of the World Match Racing Tour is abroad. And so there was definitely a dip there, but all the major events like Congressional Cup, Match Cup Sweden, and Bermuda still attract the best teams in the world, and they bring their best guys with them. So the competition hasn't really faltered in that standpoint.
How good a shape do you have to be in to race at what you're racing? Because there's so many movements and there's so many. I mean, I would think that you're not an old man in the sport, but I would think that the older guys couldn't compete with the younger guys because there is so much physicality to the fleet and the tour you're involved in. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, certain boats and certain classes are really physical. Like, we have pretty long days on the water when you compare it to other events.
Detroit in a couple of weeks. Just some thoughts on Detroit. You've been here before.
Yeah, so Detroit's a really unique venue. It comes with a river, which is a unique, definitely one of the only events I've been to that you race with a consistent current going one direction, which makes it really interesting from a tactical standpoint because, certain wind directions you during your penalty turn upwind, other ones you want to do it downwind where you're getting the maximum current pushing you along the course. So from that standpoint, it adds another aspect to the game that makes it a lot of fun to sail. Detroit's one of the events that has eluded me so far of the grade twos in the US. So that one I'd love to tick off check it off the list this summer, but we'll see what happens. The weather conditions are always kind of tricky, and the Ultimate 20s are definitely a boat that favors smaller skippers with bigger crew on the rail. So we'll see what the weather gods decide to bring us. But I've been in the finals twice and against small skippers with big crew, and there wasn't much I could do, unfortunately. But that's part of the game that we play.
Right. Well, listen, we look forward to having you in town. We'll hopefully spend some time and maybe get a little more depth. We have a conversation a little bit about the world of sailing if we get a second. And best of luck this week in Chicago. And we look forward to having you here in Detroit.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
We're talking with Lance Smotherman, who is helping out with the World Match Racing Tour event coming to Bayview. Lance, you've been running that event for a while. This is a long-term match racing event that's been going on since '99. Bayview's had it for a number of years. and hopefully you're going to see some of the best match racers. And we're going to get into the actual race protocol in a couple seconds, but you got some serious folks coming to Bayview here in another week and a half.
Yeah, I think we have, 3 of the top 10 in the world will be at Bayview.
Including the number 1 racer, who is Chris Poole.
Correct.
So you're going to see some serious match racing. And just out of curiosity, why doesn't it get more attention than it gets? And is that a fair question?
It's a really fair question, and I'm afraid I don't have a good answer. Everybody who gets associated with match racing absolutely go bonkers over it, but unless you kind of somehow get into it, you can't really understand it. And here's just a perfect example of it. We did a U.S. match race qualifier about a month ago, and I had a fellow member from Bayview come out with an umpire team, and he admitted that he was never in favor of Bayview doing all these match racing. He just didn't understand why. And by the time he stepped off the umpire boat, he was a fanatic about match racing. He goes, "You've completely changed my thought on racing sailboats." But if you don't get that experience, people are just, now we don't need to do that. I just can't understand it.
Okay. Let's start with some really easy basics. Match racing is what they do in the America's Cup, which is obviously the most well-known race in world history. I think that's a fair statement, right?
Yes.
So if you like to watch America's Cup, this is the same kind of racing. So it's really simple, number 1. Number 2, they don't charge tickets anywhere. You get to come watch guys race for free. And the third part of that is being in the river in front of Bayview, which is where the course will be. You've got a great place to see the race itself.
Exactly.
So that's all you had is information. I can't imagine if you're a sail racer, why you want to come out and watch not only the tactics that go on, because you can learn something. I know Dave Perry is certainly one of America's great match race coaches. He's been at Bayview. He's been in the area a number of times over the last, say, 18 months. To me, it's the perfect sailing venue in an Olympic year.
It is. It's a great venue. It's tremendous watching that kind of racing because it's not like any other kind of sail racing. You're not going around some course and it's not kind of slow going. These are the best guys in the world, and all they do is they're on about 0.2 of a mile course, just attacking each other nonstop. I mean, it's just nonstop excitement, and it's in a very short area. So it's like a circus almost.
Okay. Wherever these guys go, they race the boats that are identical from whatever yacht club they're racing at. But here's what's really interesting. They switch boats at Bayview. So if you're in boat number 1 today, you might be in boat number 2 tomorrow. So there's no way to get a step up. It's not like you're able to.
You'll probably actually be in 2 or 3 different boats each day.
Okay.
Each day. So they'll do a handful of matches and then they'll rotate. And then they'll do another handful of matches and rotate again.
Okay.
And, you'll probably be in anywhere from 8 to 10 different boats by the time the event is over. So
I think of all the conversations we have about ORC and PHRF and everybody trying to tweak, this really comes down to who can sail, right?
Exactly.
Either you know what line, what halyard to pull, or not halyard, what sheet blind. You need to know how to really understand the premise. I think that's the focus of this thing.
Yeah, and it's also very interesting because, as you mentioned, every venue has a different boat. So in New York, as an example, they may be in Swedish match race 40s, which means they're going to have 5 people on the crew, and they're going to have symmetrical spinnakers. And at Bayview, it's an ultimate 20 type boat, which is 3 people, and they're asymmetrical. So it takes a complete different approach to even sail the boat. And when these guys can go from one type of boat to another and just keep on winning, it just reinforces they are the best in the world.
I know the last time they had match racing, we're in an Olympic year. We just obviously finished up in Marseille. The last time they had a match racing in the Olympics was 2012. And I just got to kind of wonder, with the excitement that this brings, this would be you're talking about a perfect made for television event. This has got to be it. I wouldn't think there would be a better kind of racing for sailing, especially with the proximity of, like you say, 0.2 of a mile on a course.
Yeah, I think it is definitely best for viewing, and uh, I don't want to say regretfully, but we have sailors from all over, and they kind of, somebody gets good at sailing a fin, and so that's all they sail is the fin, and then they practice at it, and then they want to go to an Olympic event because they can sail their fin. And not that they're not a great sailor, but put them in 6 different types of boats over 6 weeks, and then see how they line up.
And if you look down the list of the winners since '99, you're talking about Russell Coots and Ben Ainsley and Peter Gilmore. You're talking about some serious. You're talking about some of the best racers in the last quarter century that have been a part of this. So, what can we expect coming out to Bayview? If you want to come out and watch this, maybe explain what we should be. If you're a fan, what it's free of charge, but maybe explain where they might go and how they might participate in watching.
I know that there's a lot of folks that make it out to Bayview and just sit out on the lawn. We've had years where there's been such crowds that we've actually brought bleachers in and lined the shore with bleachers, kind of like they did at the Gold Cup back in the day, at the Rooster Tail area. And as we've already mentioned, the racing is going to take place within a couple hundred yards of that shore. So you'll be able to see it, right from the get-go. And it's more than just to a sailor to see the tactics and the strategy. It's the excitement of watching. Literally, we have 3 of the top 10 in the world, and we have 4 that's in the top 20. These guys are really good, and they do not give each other any quarter. They will go at each other, and it's pretty epic.
Is there any local flavor? We have any? Michael Kirkman was involved, I think, for a little while in racing. Is there any local flavor that's going to be involved in this race?
We have 2 Bayview members that are going to be in it. Ryan Seago, who is ranked 20th in the world, and Ryan's been doing very well. And then Michael Kirkman is coming back. And Michael, I think, is ranked in the 200s somewhere. He went away to college and has been doing a lot of college sailing, and that took him away from some of the match racing. But, he's a real good sailor. But again, it just reinforces that getting around and doing some of these other kind of events doesn't necessarily, translate into becoming a great match racer.
There are 6 events that culminate in a championship. Is Detroit the only venue that has current because you're in the river that you're aware of? And my question to that is it fair to say it's a 2.5 knot current in the front of Bayview?
It's pretty close to 2.5, yes.
And well, that's another element.
There are plenty of venues that have a little bit of current.
Okay.
No one has the current that Bayview does. And sometimes if you sailed like in Charleston, there's 3 different rivers that kind of meet, and there's pretty crazy current there as well. But they basically run fleet racing there, and I'm not aware of any high-end match races that'll be done in that current.
I was just thinking another thing they got to deal with, especially if they're new to the area, right? Most of the guys not from here.
Yes, and it creates challenges for the race committee on how to set the courses up, because it can be very complex to try to set up so that you can have a square beat and a square run when the current is that hard. So we're always working on making some changes to the course to try to make sure that we give these guys a great course to attack each other on.
Markset Bot must have to put out bigger batteries with the current, be able to fight those small horsepower engines that they've got to direct those things. They got to work overtime to be in that river, I would think.
Yeah, the Markset Bots, we generally use them for the bottom end of the course. We use them at the pin, and sometimes at the leeward mark, because the current's so strong, and because any movement in that windward mark could really influence a match race more so than any other kind of racing. So we tend to use drop marks for the windward marks. But I recall last year, and it's no slight on Mark's at bot at all, but I recall last year, just because of the time of year we have it, the river was full of weeds that are, just coming in off of the lake. The current's taking them down, and the propellers on the Markset bots were getting tied up in weeds, and they were kind of moving around. So it got a little sketchy there for a while last year.
For a guy who lived in San Diego for 25 years, we used to have kelp cutters on the front of the boat.
Yeah.
So you could cut the kelp, and it's very foreign to anybody that didn't live in, on the West Coast.
Absolutely.
But what's this long, and you go out of San Diego Bay and you're making, either left or right. The kelp beds are, it would slow. I mean, it would slow you almost to a stop. But that's neither. You are you are the prime official for this race. Am I correct?
I'm the chief umpire.
Chief umpire. Now let me ask you a simple question. These guys are the best in the world. Not to suggest that your ability to officiate isn't as good, but do you have to really be on your mark because these guys they know all the tricks because they are some of the best in the world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not just knowing the rules and so on, but knowing for the umpires, you have to have your boat in a position where you can see when there's a foul. And having your boat in the right place at the right time all the time is near impossible. And when these guys do some of the moves that they make, the umpires are kind of caught looking at themselves thinking, what was that? And how did I get here? It's pretty intense. We have, because it's at least a grade 2 and possibly a grade 1 event, the rules from World Sailing are that every match has to have one international umpire on each match. And then you can have a national level umpire as a second person in the boat. But
right.
every match has an international umpire umpiring it. And we have 5 international umpires at this year's event. So I guess you could also say that we're bringing in the best officials that we can to try to meet the challenge. We have umpires coming from New Zealand, Canada, Germany, Japan, and the U.S.
The old standard for officiating has always been the quality is the guy who knows how not to blow the whistle, to not get in the way, to make the call when he has to make the call. It's a bit of his subjective umpiring. And I would think that with these guys, like you're saying, all of a sudden you see a move that you've never seen before or see something that's a little bit unique. It's making sure you get it right, but at the same time, you can't throw a flag on every play.
Well, in match racing, we only throw the flag, or mostly only throw the flag when a competitor protests, which is when they put up the Y flag or the Yankee flag. Right. They ask us to make a decision, and that's when we make it. There are a few times when an umpire makes the decision without even having a flag thrown, and that might be if somebody hits a mark or if somebody does something that gains an advantage that they shouldn't have. The umpires might intercede, but primarily the umpires only answer once that question is asked.
And those decisions are made on the water. There's no juries. Is that correct?
Well, the decisions are made on the water, and there are times we also have a jury that because all of the umpires are usually judges or international judges as well. Okay. So we do have a panel that's prepared to have a hearing. The hearings are done on the water as well, and that's only in very rare occurrences where there's a red flag protest from a competitor where they think that somehow something was drastically wrong and they call for a hearing. But otherwise, the decisions are made on the spot and usually within, maybe 10 or 15 seconds of somebody asking hey, this just took place. Did he foul me? And you better have the answer pretty quick.
As we're discussing all this, I keep thinking of in my brain, this is like the best format for racing possible, just intellectually thinking about what we're talking about. Yes. Decisions on the water, match races, close proximity. and yet we're talking about it like it's a third world event because it's not mainstream. And maybe somebody listening to this could wake up to what we probably already know, but that's neither here nor there. So
if we could get him to come out and watch it, if we can get him to jump in a boat and get close to see what it's like, anyone who loves sailboat racing would automatically love match racing. There's just no doubt about it. They just got to be exposed to it.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time. We'll hopefully spend a couple seconds with you at the event. We'll be covering it. This is obviously a pre-interview for the event coming up August 24th through the 28th, 29th. Check the schedule. We'll have some information at the end of the race, and I'm looking forward to this. This should be kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think we'll have a press conference. I think we usually have it on the Friday, so you'll want to make sure that you're ready for that.
Appreciate your time.
We line them up in front of Bayview and let people ask them questions and put them on the spot.
Want to thank Chris Poole for spending some time. We'll get a chance to interview him next week, and certainly John Smotherman for explaining exactly how match racing is. You should get out to Bayview next week because you're going to see some racing that I think you'll find to be pretty interesting. 3 of the top 10 sailors in that discipline in the world are coming here to town, so I think it'll be fun to watch. The other thing we wanted to mention is we didn't get a chance to get up to the Little Traverse Cup for the GL52 fleet, but we wanted to show you some pictures, which is what we're doing right now. As they practice on Wednesday and Thursday, they got a chance to spend some time in Traverse City with some of the kids for the Grand Traverse Youth Sailing Organization. And then some of the other guys up in Harbor had to spend some time with the Little Traverse Sailors, which is part of the Little Traverse Yacht Club. And it's always fun to see the kids get a chance to get on a boat this size. I know we've talked a little bit about my opportunities this year on the 52s, and it's a boat like no other. And we just thought we'd bring you some of the other views. We didn't get a chance to get to the Little Traverse Cup for family reasons, but we'll certainly be out there in force for their championship. And John Hune and Katana, I think, will be figuring out whether or not they can win the championship this year. So it'll be fun. Their first year in the fleet. And as has been mentioned before, this is a great group of skippers and owners. And it's a real privilege to be able to spend some time with those guys. So we're going to get that taken care of. We'll see them in mid-September. And up next, we're going to spend some time with Connor Korgard. Connor's going to talk to us a little bit about all of it relates to Olympics. And I think he's got a really interesting insight about methodology. Doesn't necessarily mean equipment. Money is an opportunity, but he talks about methodology, and I think you'll find it to be an interesting discussion and one we hope we can improve on, because we've got to do better than finishing behind Singapore as we did here in Marseille, coming up for the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles and Long Beach. So stay ahead for Connor. We'll be back in a second. We're talking with Connor Korgard, who's one of America's great young sailors, working his way back, hopefully, to 2028 in Los Angeles. We're coming back from Paris, which is, we're going to talk, Connor, you and I are going to talk a little bit about what might be the worst disaster in American sailing in a while in the last 5 cycles for the Olympics, with 1 medal. But if you take the numbers of where our guys finished in all of those sports, it was a pretty poor finish all the way across the board. Is that a fair estimation?
I think based on what you said, yeah, when you take all the finishing positions, I think actually, it depends on how you define a bad performance, because in essence, we got more medals this games in this quad than we did in Tokyo, for example. However, it sort of depends on what metric you use, and I think that's definitely up for debate. But it obviously wasn't, we weren't top of the medal standings in terms of countries, and I don't think anyone expected us to be there.
Well, we talk about sort of the big countries. You talk about New Zealand and England. Certainly, you got to throw Australia in there. Turns out the big 3 for this Olympics is the Netherlands, Austria, and Italy in terms of medals. Now, let's be really clear. If you win 4 or 5 medals in sailing in the 9 disciplines that they offer, windsurfing, skiffs, 49ers, if you look at those disciplines, those fleets, it's not like you're walking away with 20 medals, because they're only giving away 60 medals in the entire competition of sailing. So 4 or 5 is the top. So we finished 16th, but we're finishing below Singapore in terms of, medals. And if you look at the numbers of where our guys finished in their own fleets, we are in fact near the bottom of the pile. And so my question is twofold.
are we on the right track at the small levels? Because we got to go all the way back to Beijing in 8 before we talk about winning a gold medal. So it's been dry for a while. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about, we have a non-sailing CEO, or we've got a new Olympic coach in Marcus Lynch. You can't blame Marcus Lynch coming in February and turning it around in 3 months. He's got to have his Olympics, and his ability. Hopefully, we'll be looking at Los Angeles in 2028. My question: we have junior sailing programs that go Optimus 420. Are we even in the ballpark of doing the things we should be doing right, in your mind?
Well, I think first of all, I think you raise a number of points there, but I think first of all, some of the things you mentioned about not performing necessarily at the top of the fleets per class is definitely something that is accurate. But I think also you have to necessarily look at it and take into account any sort of necessary, what I would call statistical priors to that, including the fact that over 7 of 9 of our teams were new to this games, and 9 of 13 athletes were brand new to the Olympic Games. And the Olympic Games, I've never personally sailed an Olympic Game, so I can't speak to what that's like. However, every single Olympian I've ever asked who has participated and or coached has said that the Olympic Games is a regatta like no other you've ever been to. And so essentially one of the potential things you can run into is your sort of ability to adapt, I would say. And again, by no means would I classify myself an expert, because I was not there. I don't know all the details going into this. Obviously, like you had mentioned, we've had a lack of support for quite some time. I myself, when I was, in my teens and growing up in sailing, I started to notice at, I think, quite a young age that I kept being told the same things over and over by a lot of the U.S. sailing sort of staff and marketing and those running the organization, both within the team and Greater U.S. Sailing. And I kept being told the same thing over, and I kept kind of seeing similar patterns that we weren't returning with medals. And so I'll first say that I think by far and above, I think we sent the best team that we could have possibly sent to this games, because and that's in large part to restructuring, I think, our qualification processes. So I think that's all the athletes who were there deserve to be there. And I think that they sailed their hearts out, and some did better than others and stuff, but obviously that's what it is. So I'm not going to comment on anyone, because I haven't spoken to anyone directly, and I can't speak to that. But I think the fact that we have so many new athletes is a great thing for the U.S. sailing team going forward, in terms of Olympic sailing, of course. But I think it's sort of proof that, you look at the Australian team, and they came out with an article actually that quite a lot of their team is new as well. And they see that as a strength going forward, because very few teams statistically will medal their first Olympic Games. And if they do, most of those teams who medal their first Olympic Games are in a new class to the Olympic Games. So someone has to medal. Right. But effectively, it comes down to, I think there's a lot of statistical priors that go into that, in terms of what your chances might be of medaling, just regardless of sort of experiences or experience that you might have in that class. But I think it's sort of that lends itself as a sort of proof of the poor support that we've had in this country towards our athletes, in terms of both pathways and education. And I think that's one of the things that I've always run into as a past Olympic hopeful, and still, so I think every single athlete, you would agree with me that, the support out there is very thin, and that it's extremely difficult. And to be honest, I think if they're not agreeing with that, it's probably because they're scared to be ostracized by the U.S. program and stuff like that, and they're scared to speak negatively. And so they might, kind of bat away the question. But I think that lends itself to what I think other countries sort of have different approaches. And that's where I go back to with sort of, I guess, my background in terms of coaching. I've coached all over the world and seen a lot of different approaches to, I guess, how to build an Olympic medal. I guess you could say. And I've sort of always tried to observe that with the hopes of going and doing it myself. But at least from a coaching perspective, I would say I think a lot of our structures in this country are fundamentally set up wrong. And when I say fundamentally, I think it comes back to a structure that is so rooted in the core of the onion that I speak to our educational system in this country. And that's not to say that we can't find a way around that. We can't go get medals because, that's an excuse that's outside the sport. But I think there's a major lack of support in this country for our athletes, and B, there's a very poor structuring of how things have been set up in the past 20 to 30 years in terms of what those athletes have to go through to get there and how they're getting their education, how we're bringing up our athletes from a young age all the way through to even college sailing and beyond that.
Okay, let me be specific. I'm not pointing a finger at any one specific athlete.
Of course, yeah.
Anybody I've ever interviewed in my life, and it's anybody that's pulled on their nation's colors. It's the greatest day of their career.
Yeah,
doesn't matter the
greatest
sport.
honor you can have.
That's certainly not a young translates into inexperience. Certainly, inexperience translated into being the rookie, and I understand all those things. So let me start with a very simple premise. There seems to be a way we try to teach young sailors from opties to 420s. Opportunity comes from money. So let's both agree, and I don't think this is any great formula. But if you've got more money to train, you have more time in the boat, and you don't have to worry about working 3 shifts to be able to get into the boat. So money means opportunity, and opportunity means you're going to sail better. That's the first point. So I think money is one of those things that is an easy discussion. They got to figure out a way to support their athletes in a way that they do around the rest of the world. As you pointed out earlier, England and Australia do a good job of funding. New Zealand doesn't. New Zealand's successful. But here's my fundamental question. You've been around the world. Are we in the right boats? Are we going in the right direction? And my point to it is, John Pierce said something to us. John's the head of youth sailing for U.S. Sailing. He talked to us a couple years ago about sort of junior sailing, pointing it towards keel boating rather than for competitive boats. I look at the DYRA kids from around here. You rarely see anybody at the Sears Cup. They don't go outside their districts. So the fundamental structure of, and I'll use skiing as my own example, if you want to ski in Michigan and you got some talent, there's a pipeline to the national program. There isn't one here. So are we in the right discipline with the way we're headed? And if you had sort of a magic wand, briefly, if you had a magic wand, what would you change in terms of the structure of taking a 10-year-old and with some talent, and where would you go with it? Well, that's a loaded question, but just your thoughts.
So I think fundamentally, one of the things, I guess, to speak more specifically, as I kind of mentioned before, I think fundamentally one of the things that is wrong with our coaching structure and a lot of our sailing structure in this country, it goes back to essentially our education system. And I don't necessarily mean our schools. I do mean that. However, what I really mean is in terms of how we are learning, because effectively a coach and an athlete relationship is a guidance relationship. It's a great relationship, but it's a teacher-student relationship, which means it's a two-day street, right? You have to have a great student, but you also need a great teacher. And I think, to be quite honest, our teachers are failing our students in this case, and are even on top of that, we have sort of no pathway in terms of coaching in this country, or no sort of, I guess, support in this country, other than the fact that U.S. Sailing has the sort of level-based courses, which are, let's be honest, built around the liability structure that this country has, or the litigious society that we have. So that's a whole nother thing. I'm not going to open that can of worms.
No,
if I were to take a 10-year-old, I think the easiest way to put it is, I think a lot of our sailors are, frankly, from what I've witnessed in the past, not necessarily this games, and not even Tokyo, but from what I've witnessed in person in the past, is I think a lot of our sailors are just as fast as the top boats when we line up, for example, off the start line, and this is at the Olympic level. And we're just as fast as a lot of those top boats, even down to the millimeter or the inches, right? When we line up outside of a race, so when we're doing our warm-ups and stuff like that. However, I tend to see it as when we get off the start line, where is it that our sailors are suddenly not finding themselves jumping ahead? right? And why is it that someone else just suddenly was able to gain that half boat length, which turns into a cross or something like that, and fundamentally changes the outlook of your race? So effectively, sailing is a game of variables, which means it's a prioritization game, which means you have to have a very efficient thinking engine in terms of how to prioritize those variables. And you have to come up with models to do so on the fly. If we're not teaching that skill in itself, then we are failing the student. And what I mean by that is, I think our coaching system in this country is fundamentally flawed in that we are telling athletes what to do, and we're not asking them. Never once have I been, I would say, asked a question by any of the higher level coaches in our country. Right? And I think even some of the lower coaches, I'm always just baffled by that. And one of the things I discovered in some other countries that are a lot more successful in their Olympic sailing, is that they fundamentally start when the kids are 6 years old. They don't even know how to sail. They start by asking questions, and they don't tell them anything. And so that instead of telling the kid, oh, you need to put the rudder on and you need to steer the boat this way by pushing it or pulling the tiller, instead, they just put them in the boat and push them off. And they let their brain figure it out. And they do that within a safe realm in terms of, not too much wind, or maybe they pull the sail out and they just get the hang of the steering in this example, right? But what they're doing is they're wiring a neural pathway, because anytime we're trying to teach, or we're effectively trying to wire the brain in the correct way to be able to think efficiently on the fly, we have to wire the correct neural pathways. And if we're always telling someone what to do, then they're never actually learning how to think on their own. And it's not to say that our athletes can't think on their own or anything like that. I don't mean that. However, I think that's what I mean fundamentally, that we are, in my opinion, flawed at doing in this country. Is we have a lot of, I think, coaches and our coaching staff is taught that you line up behind someone and you yell and scream at them and you blow a whistle and you say, hey, pull this string to this mark. Oh, no, put this at this mark. Okay, now you feel fast. Okay, great. Oh, wow, you learned so much from me. Now give me my fat paycheck for the day. We'll see you later. Bring me back tomorrow so I can make some more money. And I think it's fundamentally designed that way. And so instead, the problem with that is the sailor comes away thinking they've learned a lot, but it's effectively what it is, to sum it up entirely, is telling is not teaching, right? And so when you have sailors just continually being told what, and they're not, from a very base level, learning to think for themselves and learning to make mistakes on their own and allowed to make those mistakes and learn from them, then I think you wind up with people who get discouraged and they thought they were somewhere where they maybe weren't. And instead of coming back, they just go, oh, I guess I'm not good. And I think that shows in a lot of our structures.
It's a great observation, and methodology is one of the factors that, just from my own experience in junior sailing, and I'm surprised that that kids don't just go sail. You get in the boat and off you go. Again, make sure you're safe, make sure you're in places where you're not going to drown, and I get all those understandings. Briefly, and I say this from this standpoint: are we in the right boats? Is an optimist a way to learn is the bottom, or is the rest of the world train the way we train?
I think they do, minus that fact that, I think a lot from a very young age, I think, 6 years old, the brain is incredible, and it figures, even when it doesn't know, it has to figure out a way to figure out, right? And that's that critical structure that I think we're sort of missing in our education processes in this country. But in terms of the classes, I think the classes are the classes, and I'm not saying, I don't mean by any means that, oh, they're not going to change or something. I think the world all sails different classes. There are bigger classes, there are smaller classes, there are technical classes, there are non-technical classes. You can look at it all sorts of different ways. There are foiling classes, non-foiling classes, whatever. However, it's about looking at what are the strengths and weaknesses of these classes and what are we missing as a whole in terms of our sailing, right? And I think you look at North America and you go, okay, what are we just naturally going to have sailors who come out of our country mainly and be fundamentally good at? Boat handling and tactics. Why? Because of college sailing and high school sailing, right? And a lot of scholastic sailing. And maybe not everyone went that path, but in mass, we're probably going to have people who are incredibly good at boat handling, incredibly good at tactics. To me, I think a lot of the people or a lot of the youth sailors that I see, even high school sailors, even beginner level high school sailors, they have all the tactical knowledge they need to frankly go podium at a world championship. What they don't have is any sort of technical skill to create boat speed out of. They don't have much of a knowledge of the rules, and I think that goes back to, for example, how we're teaching the rules, right? How we observe them instead of just giving them a thick book that makes no sense, right? And so things like that, where it's like we don't have any approach to starting, and I think it goes back to sort of having this creativity to create drills and games and practice for sailors such that they become curious and they want to learn more. And they have to break things down on a sort of hierarchical level to be able to say, okay, well, all of sailing can fit into this. And one of the number one questions I ask sailors, even from 10 years old on, as soon as they kind of become racers, they've kind of scatterbrained all this information. It's sort of like writing, a writing or idea web, right? And it's kind of all this information and tidbits here, and some of it's good, some of it's not so great, right? But it's all scattered, and I think most of them have never been faced this question. So I try to ask the question. I say, well, what's your worldview of sailing? What if you had to pull everything together? How do you view sailing? Like, I want you to create a structure. And it's not even about, oh, this is right or wrong. It's just, have you actually taken the time to prioritize how does this all fit together? And I think very few sailors take that time, and we don't prioritize that. And so as a result of that, we sort of have a lot of sailors who have a lot of inherent skill. However, we just keep drilling those skills, for example. So again, like I said, a lot of the high school sailors, they have all the tactical wherewithal to go win a Worlds. They lack the boat speed. They lack the starting ability. They severely lack the strategy knowledge in terms of what wind is and stuff like that. And instead, they just keep focusing on, oh, should I leave out or should I dock, right? And it's like, that doesn't really make a difference most of the time at the top level, because if you can just be faster, it's not going to matter.
A lot of the conversations I've had in the last 2 or 3 days concerning the lack of success in these 2024 Olympics in Marseille is guys my age who want to go back to 1970 because that's the way it was great then. The world changes, and it's almost a little bit like the presidential election. Let's let the people my age move over, retire, allow some younger folks to come along and understand those premises, this process. And that's kind of why I wanted to have a conversation with somebody, your age, that's been in that, fighting that pipeline. I understand the money issue. It is what it is. But you make a really interesting point about methodology, because I go back to the junior programs, which is where every sports base starts from, whether it's skiing or baseball. You got to start someplace. And I wonder sometimes why they don't have half days at junior sailing, because they spend 2 hours playing cornhole or chasing. They're there. It's a babysitting service to some extent, and I get that that's part of the premise. But until we give them the knowledge to learn how to go faster, which is really what you're saying, you have all the technical understanding, but if you really don't know how to make the boat go faster, what's the point?
Exactly. And I think even that, like, I would, just putting my coaching hat on, I would almost tweak what you just said instead of, it's how do we give them that knowledge? It's not about giving them, because we don't want to give them anything. It's not that. It's how do we create a platform with which they can go play and learn how to do this on their own, and they enjoy doing that, so they keep coming back and they get better as a result.
Language and methodology. I use this example all the time. At the national level ski racing, when you get kids that are 5, 6 years old, we can start talking about angulation, and I tell them to put the right toe down. They put the right toe down. It cants the foot, and off they go. They get the understanding when you tell them to put their big foot down. I read manuals from U.S. Sailing, whether it's 101 or all the way up the line, and it's written by MIT professors to some extent. I'm not knocking what they're doing, but until you have the sandlot experience of just getting in the boat and going and making the mistake and doing whatever you're going to learn, you're going to get better. And I think that's something that, listen, I appreciate your time. I know you're headed to, I'm not mistaken, you're headed out to the East Coast, right?
Yep, headed back east right now, so shortly.
Spend some time there, find yourself a partner, and you still looking at 2028 as a sort of a possible plan?
Yeah, personally, I would still like to find a partner towards LA 2028. I think again, it sort of goes back to what is our structures in this country, and I think if I can find someone who I believe understands, what it takes, and they're willing to put in those efforts, and we can create the right structure around it, then I'm all in towards that. Until that time, I think it's very difficult because I think there are a lot of people in this country who frankly, I think they just sort of have a lack of education. Unfortunately, due to that lack of support that we've had, both not even monetarily, but again, growing up in sailing and stuff, to know what it sort of takes in this country is very difficult, even compared to other countries, to go and do that. So, I hope I can find that. I hope I can help to others on what I think it sort of takes and my experiences. But yeah, I hope I can find a partner towards that.
Well, there's lots of support because I'm wearing a youth national championship shirt. You've got a U.S. ski sail team shirt on, so they got to start listening to the middle to the bottom part of this thing, and instead of just paying attention to the top end of the ladder, maybe they learn something. So hopefully with Marcus and the rest of them. But listen, I appreciate your insight, and you have a great fall, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks so much.
We want to thank Connor for his time, and I think some interesting insight. When you get a chance to actually be a part of the pipeline, you get more understanding than what the rest of us certainly can comprehend. We also wanted to spend some time thanking Chris Poole for coming to town. He'll be here next week, and John Smotherman. And we look forward to the Detroit Cup. I think it's going to be fun to watch. So all that goes on, we will be back next week with episode 131. And for all the guys in back, we'll see you next time.